conspiracy theories or God-sized stories. And I'm going to just quickly share my screen with you so that I can take you through. Let me just see. I'll start my video so that you can see me as well as my slides as I start from the beginning. Conspiracy theories or God-sized stories. I don't know about you, but I certainly find that at the moment it feels like I'm living in a very confusing world, a world gone crazy. And it's good every now and then, as we have been doing, as Christine so wonderfully prepared us to spend time in each other's presence, as we've been noticing ourselves, our bodies. It's also good to stop and to just notice again what our crazy world is like. I don't have to spend much time explaining any of these. If I use the word disruption, who could have believed that the end of November 2020 would have looked like this? If somebody had described it a year ago, I think we would have laughed them off as crazy. It's a very disruptive period, but it's not just the pandemic. The pandemic has, and COVID-19 has made more clear some of the dysfunction that's going on in the world. But fake news and misinformation predate the lockdown. It also seems to be a world that is increasingly falling apart. There's polarization, there's us versus them. And another piece that I really encourage you to notice, because it can be slightly hidden, and I'd say the powers that be want it to be hidden, this is a world that is getting more and more and more unequal. So, to our world gone crazy, how do we react or respond? Those two words, reacting and responding. It's what we do because of the way the world is, but reacting and responding are slightly different things. As human beings, we are designed naturally to fight or flight. We either want to go in all guns blazing, or we want to run away, or we want to put our head in the sand. So the adrenaline that kind of keeps surging through our bodies in these difficult times is going to be inviting us to fight or to flight. But as Christians, as people who follow Christ, we are constantly being invited to a third way, neither fight nor flight, but inhabiting this world in God's presence in the now. One thing we're always doing is we're trying to make meaning. It's just how God has made us. But when we're trying to make meaning, when we're trying to make sense, and if you're like me, you reach for some kind of a story, we're constantly going to be tempted to simplify. So much easier if we can paint the world in black and white. The world is not simple. So the trying to simplify is probably going to lead us on the wrong track. We're also, when we're making meaning, we're constantly looking for things and looking for explanations that confirm our biases. In other words, we know what we believe, we know what we like, we know what we think, we know what we hope for. And the temptation is going to be confirming our biases. Another temptation is going to be building walls. From my South African background, I love the imagery of circling the wagons. I don't know if you've heard of the Great Trek. It was part of the history of South Africa that I had to study at school. But this idea of circling the wagons or building walls, when we make meaning in these difficult times when we're feeling unsafe, we want to close in on ourselves. But we can also make meaning in the way that God invites us to make meaning, because this difficult world that we live in is also a world of possibilities. When everything gets so upended and confused and all our certainties just come crashing down, what we also have is possibility. We have the space to rebuild something new. So we're invited to respond. How do we make meaning so that we can respond? I find that it helps me to know what to say no to, so that I know how to, with the people of God, say yes to the right things. So here are some of the things we should be saying no to. There's always going to be a temptation to shrink God down to fit our own little stories. How do you know you're doing that? You're doing that when God looks kind of like a bigger, stronger version of you, your hopes, your dreams. When God starts liking the people you like and disliking the people you dislike, and God's agenda looks exactly like your own, what's probably happened is you've shrunk God down to fit your little story. We also have to say no to ways of making sense of our world which deal in very polarizing us versus them. I don't know, maybe you can think of some ways that we do that. But there's a particular way that I want to highlight, and that's scapegoating. I don't know if you know what scapegoating is. Scapegoating is where you find someone to blame. It could be an individual, it could be a community. It's always part of them, not us. You find someone to blame and somehow you get rid of them. So in today's world, it's very easy, for instance, to scapegoat refugees, or in Christian circles, to scapegoat Muslims. With the pandemic, there certainly at the beginning was attempts to scapegoat Asians, to scapegoat the Chinese, the Chinese virus. So you make it their problem so that if you get rid of them, somehow you can fix the problem. We need to say no to that. We also need to say no to impotent rage. When you get so angry and frustrated, but it's the kind of anger that doesn't empower you to do something. It just makes you close in on yourself and explode. And also you need to say no to despair. Despair is believing things cannot be different. Vested interest, entrenched powers want us all to believe that things can't be different. Like the housing crisis. It's like, well, the market is such that this is sad, but it's inevitable, making us despair. We have to say no to that. No to that voice that says things can't be any different. Jesus has given us a way of helping to make sense in a confusing world. Jesus told us that when you're confused, look at the fruit. I'm sure you know this teaching of Jesus from the Sermon on the Mount, where he tells us to be on your guard against false prophets. Can I maybe also say, be on your guard against false narratives, against conspiracy theories, against things that you'll hear which are not true. Because they come to you looking like sheep on the outside, but on the inside, they're really like wild wolves. How will you know them? By what they do. You'll look at the fruit, and from the fruit, you'll know the quality of the tree. How can we link that to the stories that we hear, or the way we make meaning, or conspiracy theories, or whatever it is? We discern the fruit. That first piece there on the bad fruit. I actually began with a longish quote that I'm not going to spend time with, just because the fruit that we know well, the good fruit, is the fruit of the Spirit. Love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, generosity, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. we're told that that is the fruit that the Spirit of God produces. That would be the fruit that a God-sized story would produce. But St. Paul, in that letter, when he lists those, when he lists the opposite, he lists kind of what I've got there on that slide. Maybe you can look at some of the things. And I'd say when we think of bad fruit, we probably think of the first few, you know, all that fornication, all that sex stuff, and toward the end, drunkenness, carousing. But it's perhaps the pieces in the middle that as Christians we can become so used to that we don't recognize that they are the bad fruit. Things like quarrels, dissensions, factions, envy. Sometimes we can think that we are being super holy because we are standing up against them. But all of that is bad fruit. So I've just listed there some other fruit that helps us. If this is what the stories that we're hearing, that we're believing, that we're living out of, if this is what they produce, then there's something wrong with the stories. I'll just read these. An anger that either paralyzes us or makes us hate others. If that's what's being produced, there's something wrong with the story. If the story is about selfish concern for me and mine that lets the rest of the world go to hell, my right and my freedom not to wear a mask, is it a despair that kills off hope? Is it a complacency, oh sure, everything will be grand, that makes me put my head in the sand? Is it a numbness that makes us stop caring? Basically anything that closes us off and diminishes our compassion. So these are some of the fruit that can be produced by the wrong stories. The right stories are the stories that are the God-given stories or explanations or narratives that help us to get a hold on what is happening so that we can basically walk alongside God. Already mentioned that fruit of the Spirit. One of my favorite Old Testament verses where the prophet is saying, what is it the Lord wants you to do? To do justice, to love kindness, to walk humbly with your God. If the stories we tell ourselves are making us less concerned in terms of justice, if they're making us arrogant or if they're making us mean, they are not the fruit of the Spirit. Hope, the opposite of despair, a costly but joyful solidarity, and then finally, Christ-likeness. So, God stories are not neat explanations that put God in a box. What is God doing in the world? If we have, oh, God is punishing, or God is doing this, or God is doing that, if we have stories that we're helping kind of make sense of the world for ourselves, that are neat and tidy and put God in a box, they are not God-sized stories. God is much, much bigger than that. And that then means that the God stories, which are God-sized stories, need to be way, way bigger than us. They need to be open-ended narratives that call us to participate in the mystery of what God is doing in the world. So, how are some of the ways that we can recognize truth in a confusing world? First of all, we need to be open to the truth. We need to want the truth, however uncomfortable. Bring the stories into prayer. I don't know if you've done that. Not only prayed about events or prayed about what you're frightened of or prayed about what you're worried about, but actually bring the stories you tell yourself. Say, Lord, I've been listening to this pandemic, for instance, and discuss it with God and let God show you perhaps what may be happening there. Pay attention to the fruit, move beyond our walls, Listen to those who are different from us. We can get caught up in the wrong stories when we're staying within our own little boxes. That's how fake news and misinformation manages to thrive. And finally, join God in listening and working from the margins. In other words, we can try and make sense of life thinking about what the powerful are doing, but God is the one that we find in the poor. God is the one that we find in those who are struggling. And what God is concerned for is to bring peace and justice. God is at the margins. We need to be joining God there. Now, I know I've gone through all of that really quickly. So I hope that as I was speaking, that you were able to be linking it to some stories that you've been hearing, or some ways that you've been making sense of the world for yourself. So I wonder what stories you have been hearing. And then, is there anything that you've heard that can help you to recognize either the truth or the danger of those stories? So I'm going to stop sharing there.